Chapter 1. My English learning journey started when I realized that every small effort counts. I wasn't born with perfect English skills, but I discovered a routine that made me confident and motivated. It all began one rainy morning with a steaming cup of tea and a promise to myself. I would dedicate just 20 minutes every day to improve my English. That didn't sound like much, but I quickly found that it was enough to build a solid foundation. My first step was to surround myself with the language in ways that felt natural and enjoyable. I downloaded podcasts that focused on interesting topics: culture, travel, and psychology. I listened to them on my way to work, during lunch breaks, and even while I cooked dinner. At first, it was hard to catch every word, but I noticed that repeated listening helped me get used to the natural rhythm of English. Slowly, words that once seemed foreign started to feel familiar. To make sure I truly understood what I was hearing, I started keeping a small notebook. Whenever I heard a new word or an expression that caught my attention, I wrote it down. But I didn't stop there. In the evenings, I would review these notes, trying to use the words in my own sentences. Sometimes I made mistakes, but I kept going. I didn't care if my sentences were a little clumsy at first. The important thing was to practice. Another part of my routine was reading short articles and stories. I chose materials that were just a bit challenging so I wouldn't get bored or discouraged. At first, I read slowly, underlining new words and expressions. Over time, my reading speed increased, and I started to see connections between different ideas. It felt like I was opening a door to a new world. Of course, learning doesn't stop with listening and reading. Speaking was the hardest part for me. I didn't have a partner to practice with, but I didn't let that stop me. I decided to become my own conversation partner. Every day I spoke to myself in English. I talked about my plans for the day, what I saw on my walk to the park, or even how I felt in the moment. It was strange at first, but it gave me confidence. Soon, speaking English alone became part of my daily routine, just like brushing my teeth. At the end of the first week, I noticed something interesting. I wasn't just memorizing words, I was starting to think in English. It felt like my brain was switching languages without even trying. That's when I realized that this wasn't just a hobby. It was a journey to becoming truly comfortable in English. The best part? I wasn't spending hours every day. My routine was simple: listen, read, write, and speak. I did it every day, even if it was just for a short time. Consistency was key. And as the days turned into weeks, I started to feel like English was becoming a part of me. This was just the beginning. I knew I had a long way to go, but I was excited to continue. My routine was working, and I couldn't wait to see how much more I could learn. Chapter 2. The initial weeks of my English learning routine had laid a solid foundation. Listening to podcasts, reading articles, jotting down new vocabulary, and speaking to myself had become second nature. However, as my confidence grew, so did my desire to challenge myself further and refine my skills. I realized that passive consumption wasn't enough. I needed to engage more actively with the language. To achieve this, I began writing daily journal entries in English. Each evening, I would reflect on my day, penning down thoughts, experiences, and emotions. This practice not only improved my writing fluency, but also helped me internalize new vocabulary and grammatical structures. Recognizing the importance of feedback, I sought out online language exchange platforms. Connecting with native speakers provided me with invaluable insights into colloquial expressions and cultural nuances. Our conversations, though initially nerve-wracking, became more fluid over time, bolstering my speaking and listening skills. To diversify my learning, I incorporated English language films and series into my routine. Watching with subtitles allowed me to associate spoken words with their written forms, enhancing my comprehension. I would often pause to note down intriguing phrases or idioms, later researching their meanings and usage. Understanding that language is deeply intertwined with culture, I delved into English literature and music. Reading novels exposed me to varied writing styles and enriched my vocabulary. Meanwhile, listening to songs helped me grasp rhythm, intonation, and informal language. I even started singing along, which, albeit challenging, was a fun way to practice pronunciation. To ensure consistent progress, I set specific goals. Each week, I aim to learn a set number of new words, write a certain number of journal entries, and engage in conversations with language partners. Tracking these objectives kept me motivated and provided a clear sense of achievement. Of course, there were moments of self-doubt and frustration. Sometimes I struggled to express complex ideas or misunderstood native speakers. However, I reminded myself that mistakes are integral to learning. Embracing these challenges, I viewed them as opportunities to grow and refine my skills. How to learn EnglishinLevels.com. As weeks turned into months, the cumulative effect of my efforts became evident. I found myself thinking in English, crafting sentences more effortlessly, and engaging in deeper conversations. The language, once foreign, was becoming an integral part of my identity. This journey was far from over, but the progress I had made reaffirmed my belief in the power of consistent, intentional practice. With each passing day, I was not just learning English, I was living it. Chapter 3. The morning air was crisp as usual. I sat at my desk sipping black coffee, my notebook open in front of me. My routine had evolved. It was no longer just about habits. It had become a lifestyle. Learning English was no longer a task I had to do. It was something I looked forward to, like talking to an old friend who always had something new to say. By this point, I had already established a strong rhythm. Every day began with listening. Podcasts, audiobooks, YouTube videos of native speakers discussing everything from politics to pop culture. But as I progressed, I realized that passive listening alone wasn't enough. I needed to speak more. That's when I introduced a new ritual into my routine: active shadowing. Active shadowing changed the game. I'd pick a short clip, ideally around 2 to 3 minutes, and listen to it repeatedly, mimicking the speaker's tone, rhythm, and intonation. At first, I felt silly. I stumbled over words. I sounded robotic. But within a few days, I began to notice subtle changes. My tongue rolled through phrases more naturally. My pauses began to mirror those of the native speakers. I was not just speaking English, I was feeling it. To keep track of progress, I started recording myself. Each week, I'd pick a topic and speak for 5 minutes straight, completely unscripted. I talked about my week, books I read, things I observed, or topics I was curious about. Listening to these recordings felt awkward at first, but soon it became a source of motivation. I could literally hear my improvement, my confidence, clarity, and fluency growing week by week. However, improvement never comes in a straight line. There were plateaus, times when I felt like I wasn't improving at all. These moments tested my patience. I sometimes felt stuck, frustrated that my vocabulary hadn't grown fast enough or that I still made basic grammatical mistakes. But instead of letting frustration win, I began to treat these moments as opportunities for reflection. I realized that even in those flat phases my brain was absorbing, learning in the background. To overcome these hurdles, I began implementing deliberate practice techniques. I selected complex sentences from articles and tried rewriting them in my own words. I'd break them down into parts: subject, verb, object, and experiment by replacing words or changing sentence structure while maintaining meaning. It was slow and tedious at times, but incredibly powerful for deep learning. Another technique I fell in love with was the input-output switch. After reading an article or watching a video, I'd immediately try to speak or write about it. I'd explain the ideas as if I were teaching someone else. Teaching, as I discovered, is one of the best ways to retain and internalize knowledge. My mind became sharper, my vocabulary richer, and my explanations clearer. Evenings were dedicated to vocabulary reinforcement. I used context-based flashcards, Not just single words, but full phrases and example sentences. I avoided isolated memorization and instead focused on how words lived and breathed in real language. Tools like Anki helped me revise efficiently using spaced repetition to target the words I was likely to forget. I also started keeping a language diary. Every night I'd write one page about my day, my thoughts, or anything I wanted to express, always in English. Some entries were emotional, others observational, but every word mattered. Over time, I noticed my writing becoming more natural and expressive. I was developing not just technical proficiency, but a personal voice in English. One of the most unexpected benefits of my routine was how it sharpened my thinking clarity. Because I had to constantly articulate thoughts in another language, I became more precise and intentional in my expression. I started noticing nuances in arguments, identifying logical flaws, and organizing my ideas more clearly. English was no longer just a skill, it was a tool for better thinking. Around this time, I found an online forum for language learners. It was a gold mine of ideas, discussions, and support. I started contributing by sharing my journey, giving tips, and helping others. Engaging with this community gave me a sense of belonging. I was no longer learning in isolation. I was part of a global movement of learners striving to be better. One day, I received a message from a fellow learner. She had read one of my posts and found it inspiring. We started chatting, sharing voice messages, and even practicing speaking together. That was my first real conversation with another person in English. It was awkward but exciting. The bond we formed went beyond language. We encouraged each other, held each other accountable, and celebrated small victories. That friendship reminded me that language at its core is a bridge. It connects minds, hearts, and cultures. Through English, I wasn't just learning to speak, I was learning to connect with others and with myself. As I looked back at the path I had traveled, I realized that practice had evolved into purpose. My English routine was no longer a collection of tasks. It was a journey, a daily commitment to growth, discipline, and expression. Chapter 4. The sun filtered softly through the window blinds as I stirred a spoonful of honey into my morning tea. It had become a ritual, something gentle to start my day with purpose. But this day felt different. I had reached a point in my English journey where everything seemed to converge. My morning routines, focused vocabulary learning, consistent speaking practice, and immersive listening had built something remarkable inside me. Confidence. Confidence didn't come overnight. It was stitched together through hundreds of small actions. Every phrase I repeated in front of the mirror, every word I whispered while walking alone, every podcast that played during my commute, All of these added to my internal sense of fluency. The kind of fluency that wasn't just about knowing words, but about feeling like I belonged with them. That morning, I revisited a piece of advanced writing I'd done 2 months ago. I read it aloud and immediately noticed things I would now say differently. My sentence structures were more fluid. My vocabulary choices had matured. I could sense tone and nuance. I wasn't just getting better, I was evolving. Reflective review. I sat at my desk and began what I called a reflective review. It wasn't about correcting past mistakes, it was about seeing growth in motion. I opened my learning journal where I had been writing a short reflection each night. One page caught my eye. Today I used the word unpredictable in a conversation and it felt natural. I didn't pause. I didn't translate. It just came out. That's a win. It made me smile. Wins like that built my momentum. These journal entries were no longer filled with self-doubt. They were filled with observations of progress, how certain idioms had become familiar, how I had begun using collocations naturally, and how I could now express disagreement politely and effectively. Teaching to learn an idea sparked in my mind. What if I started teaching what I'd learned to someone else? They say teaching reinforces knowledge, and I wanted to test that. I offered to help my neighbor's younger brother, Amir, who had just started learning English at school. We met in the local library every Friday evening. The first time we sat down, I asked him what he liked. Football, he said immediately. So we read short football articles together, translated difficult words, and created stories about imaginary matches. I found myself explaining grammar and pronunciation in ways I had never thought I could. It was empowering. Teaching wasn't just helping Amir, it was strengthening my confidence. Every time I explained something clearly, I felt more like an English speaker. Embracing mistakes publicly. One of the most powerful moments in this phase of my journey happened during a small group discussion in a community book club I had joined. We were talking about a novel, and I mispronounced the word subtle. I said it with the B sound, and a kind woman named Julia gently corrected me. I smiled and said, I've seen that word written so often, but I guess I never heard it spoken clearly. The group laughed softly, not at me, but with me. That moment mattered. I had made a mistake in public, accepted correction with grace, and continued the conversation without letting shame or fear hold me back. Confidence was not about being perfect. It was about continuing even when things weren't. Self-assessment and real goals. I began setting specific communication goals each week. Use 5 new idioms in conversation. write a 300-word essay and record myself reading it aloud. Summarize a 10-minute TED Talk without notes. Recreate a news segment using my own words. By assessing myself weekly, I could see how far I'd come and what needed more attention. These goals weren't overwhelming. They were meaningful and measurable. Slowly, I moved from learning English to living it. Celebrating the everyday wins one day at a cafe, I overheard two tourists struggling to order. The waiter looked lost. I stepped in gently and helped translate their request. It was such a simple thing, but the tourists were so thankful. I returned to my seat glowing with quiet pride. That was fluency, not perfection, not knowing every word, but being able to connect, to help, to bridge. That night I wrote in my journal, "Today I didn't just speak English. I used it to make someone else feel understood." That's the goal. Final reflections. As I closed my eyes that night, I felt no fear about forgetting vocabulary or using wrong tenses. Instead, I felt joy. Joy in the process. Joy in every word that had once felt foreign but now felt like part of me. My easy English routine had started with simple habits, but it had grown into something more, a lifestyle of learning, helping, connecting, and evolving. The journey hadn't ended. It never would. And that was the beauty of it.